Welcome, everyone. This is Juan Soto, Microsoft Access MVP, president of the chapter for Access with SQL Server Group, and founder of AccessUserGroups.org. Talking to you from our Southern Command Center here in Puerto Rico this time around. Thank you so much for everyone who joined. So thanks for our regulars. If you're watching us on YouTube, please join us live next time at AccessUserGroups.org. Click on the calendar link there, and we have a wide range of meetings throughout the month, and we'd love to see you in our next meeting in December. So today's topic is one that's quite interesting. I'm going to start our presentation. We're going to be talking about converting ADP files to ACCDB. So let me get this PowerPoint started, and let me share my screen. Okay, can you see my PowerPoint?
Yes.
Good, thank you very much for confirming that for me. I am going to pop the list of attendees here, so if we have any stragglers, I can allow them in. So, all right, good. I think we're good. So when it comes to this technology is quite interesting because you're probably wondering what is an ADP file. It was a file format that was created prior to 2003, and George Hepworth, who's Microsoft Access MVP, is in this call. George, you remember what's the last time ADP files were shipped with Microsoft Access? I think it was 2003, right?
I want to say you could still use them in 2010, but you couldn't create them anymore, or something like that.
Yeah. I think 2003 was the last time you could create them, or 2007.
Yeah.
It was really wonderful technology. I really loved it. I was a late bloomer to this technology. And man, I wish it was still around today because it did solve a lot of issues. And it was just a wonderful way to connect with SQL Server. There's no need for LDPC drivers. Yeah, direct connection to SQL Server. There's no need to link tables. Any tables or views that you have in your database will automatically show up in Microsoft Access front end. You can even bind a form to a stored procedure or view, something you can't do right now in terms of a stored procedure. Views you can bind, but you have to have full access to think of they're a table. And instead of queries, you were creating views directly on SQL Server. So anytime you created a query within Access and saved it, you were actually creating a view. And so it was tightly intertwined with SQL Server, and it had a very fast connection. And unfortunately, they were discontinued. They're still around. In fact, today we just started a new project for a manufacturing plant down in Texas that they use an ADP file there for everything from warehousing to scheduling. They're a fairly large, multi-million-dollar operation. It's just something that you would be hard pressed to think about, that you still have people that are still using these kind of formats. It is quite the effort, especially if they're quite complex, because I think by their nature, they were built by people who were experts in Access, because it wasn't easy to create them and make them mission critical applications with it. And so therefore, it's going to be quite the effort to convert them to ACCDB format. We finished last year another project for a casting firm here in Chicago. We do a lot of manufacturing work because I'm a mechanical engineer and a former plant manager, and they had 18 ADP files that we had to convert. It took us a year to finish that project. So this is something that we know how to do, right? Quite literally. If you are watching this on YouTube and you need help with your access to conversion file, just reach out to us. And now, one of the things that I do want to mention is to hold on to these files until they have no other choice but to convert them, right? Because let's face it, they're not selling Access 2003 anymore. So a lot of these firms are just now getting around to converting them, because you can't really have Office 2003 or 2007 or 2010 with Office 365. I mean, I know some people get it to work. It's not recommended. It really is quite difficult to enjoy both on the same computer. So what you want to do here is you're going to create a new ACCDB file, right? So I'm assuming they're going to use the latest format for Microsoft Access, which is ACCDB. Quick quiz. Does anybody know what file extensions you can use with Access besides ACCDB, ACCDE, MDB. What other file extensions can you use with Access? Does anybody know?
I don't.
Anybody? Well, it's a trick question because you can use any file extension. You can put it .org and you can still open it with Access. It's a little known fact that you can, Access doesn't care about the file extensions much. Now, you still need to right click on the file and say open with Access, but Access will open any file with any extension on it. Now, when you create that ACCDB file, you're going to import the forms, reports, modules. You're not going to import the queries or the tables because these are allocated on a SQL Server, right? Remember what I first said in my first slide? Their objects are all on the server. So you're not dealing with really queries in Access, you're dealing with views in SQL Server. So you're gonna have to link your tables and views to your new file using the latest ODBC driver. And please only download that from Microsoft.com, right? And that's just the beginning of the hard road ahead of you in converting these files. You have to review every form record source because a form can use a stored procedure as a record source. You need to be able to either convert it to a pass-through query, a table link, or a link to a view. Now, pass-through queries are read-only because by their nature, they connect to SQL Server, they download the results of the query. They don't post back any changes back to SQL Server. Pass-through queries are great for reports mostly, right? And for forms where you want to view only. They're quick and a wonderful resource, but they're read-only. So if you bind a pass-through query to a form, you're not going to be able to edit the data. And because most forms are designed to edit data, it can be a problem. So don't bind it to a pass-through query, you're going to edit the data, that's my point. When linking views, you want to keep the view name. Well, think about this because when we upgrade a regular MDB file or ACCDB file to SQL Server backend, right? That's the other way around, right? Instead of converting ADP to ACCDB, we're taking the ACCDB file and we're splitting it in front end backend and then putting the backend on a SQL Server. You want to keep those, we use table aliases so that when we create a view on SQL Server to replace a former query, like say for example, you had a query in the old ADP in your ACCDB file called QRY work in process. Well, you want to keep that same name when you link the view QRY work in process. Most views on SQL Server are named VW. So we use the VW Volkswagen, right? The VW moniker for our views on SQL Server. But because we want to be able to link that to Access, you want to link it with the same name of the query. So this idea I put out here is we're keeping the view name is so that you don't have to worry about code calling a view that doesn't exist. Any modules or other views or other queries, right? Again, you can bind a view to a form, but by its nature is read-only. If you really want to edit the data, you need to create index and Access. I did wrote a blog post on this. Just look for using SQL Server views with Access, index needed for editing data. You can find that blog post on my website, accessexperts.com/blog. And you use a DDL command to create the index. This is a fascinating application of queries in Access. Now, most people who are SQL Server experts or SQL Server users or programmers, they're used to creating a query in SQL Server that does an action such as create table, add column, right? Drop table, delete from a table, right? So these are action queries. And you pretty much can do the same thing in Access. So there is a DDL format that you can follow in Access where you can actually create a query in Access using the SQL syntax to create an index or create a new table or append a new column to a table, existing table. It's all very doable, and it's probably more more advanced technique that I want to discuss on this chat right now, but I've only used it a handful of times. Sometimes I have a situation with a customer where I need to update their back end and I can't log in. For security purposes, I have to send them a file with the latest updates. So let's say, for example, I send them a new front end file. I need to create a process to create a new query or a column because they just don't have the wherewithal to do that manually. I'll create these DDL commands and access, and I'll tell them to execute the code in the module, and it creates everything for me on their back end. So there is a way for you to do that. Anybody else use DDL commands and access to create access tables or queries? I mean, columns or indexes?
Not me.
But now you know it's available. So if you need that, consult that blog post I mentioned. You'll see an example of that. Now you could be tempted and say, you know what? I'm not going to create a view on a SQL Server. I'll just create a query in Access. Put in my tables, link the tables in the query window, and just recreate that query in Access, and then just bind that to my form or my report. And it does work. I'm not saying it doesn't. And for the most part, you're probably not going to have any issues until you do. You may have issues with performance. You may have issues with it's just too slow. And there's a really good reason for that, and that is anytime you send a SQL query to a SQL Server via the old ABC driver layer, that SQL Server has to create an execution plan for that particular query. And then it discards the execution plan because by its nature, it's a temporary query, right? In other words, if I sell SQL Server select star from TBL customers where customer state equal IL, Illinois, right? It'll create that execution plan, execute the query, return results back to me, discard the execution plan. And so if it ends up being a query that you use frequently or heavy query, the newer versions of SQL Server, will actually cache the execution plan for these temporary queries if it sees you calling it a lot. But by their nature, because they're one and done, usually it just discards the execution plan. A view does not have that issue. If I create a view in SQL Server because there's too many tables, way too many relationships, I'd rather just create the view and get the results back in Access, then just click that view and make it a table link in my Access front end. It's going to store the execution plan with that view. You can actually tweak the execution plans. Anybody seen execution plans in SQL Server with your views? Have anybody seen those at all? George, have you seen
it's been a while since it's been a while, but yeah.
I've modified execution plans. I can count on one hand the times I've had to modify execution plan because for the most part, we're dealing with small record sets. We're not dealing with millions and millions of records and transactions because if we were, they wouldn't be using Access to begin with, right? The nature of this work is these are small databases. These are 100,000 records, hundreds of thousands of records, not millions of records. And so for the most part, I don't have the need to tweak the execution plan, but I do love the fact that when I create that view, it stores the execution plan with the view, and it's a lot faster. And if you call that view repeatedly from your application, because there's some queries, some views that you're going to use all through your application, the list of customers that they're active, right? You might decide to make that a view, a SQL Server, and use that anywhere, reports or forms or other queries where you need a list of active customers. If you call that view a lot, SQL Server will automatically keep that query in the memory along with the execution plan. And so you're going to come across a phenomenon when you use Access SQL Server where your application gets faster and faster, believe it or not. You're like, think about the metamorphosis of an Access database. You create this Access database. For the most part, you're going to create it with very little data, maybe some test data. And then, and you're happy with the performance. Of course, it doesn't have a lot of data, right? We're talking about dozens of records. It's a brand new database. As you hand out the application to your client or your users at your company, and now you've got 5 people, 10 people using the Access application. What you see as the performance curve starts improving dramatically, probably faster than when you were doing it in development, because it's storing and caching the query, because now everybody's calling the same query at the same time using your application. Make sense? If you really want to dive into the weeds when it comes to how Access interacts with SQL Server with the queries, I encourage you to watch this video on our Access YouTube channel with Philipp Steiffel. I did this several years ago. It's still very applicable, where he demos the SQL Server profiler, and he shows you how SQL Server is thinking about queries and how it executes the different queries, right? In question. So when you send a complex query to SQL Server with half a dozen tables, multiple joins, it will break that query into multiple queries that executes one after the next. Similar to what we do. Sometimes I have stacked queries in my applications. I have the first query, and then my second query interacts with the results of the first one, and my third one interacts. That's also happening at the SQL Server level from just one query you're sending it. So it really is a fascinating. He has a blog post on that, but I couldn't find the blog post. But if you look at the query, the video on our Access YouTube channel, AccessUserGroups.org, and search for this tracing query performance with SQL Server by Philipp Steiffel. You're gonna, it's really good, worth watching. And that's pretty much it. I mean, it's a short and sweet presentation. Wow, not even 15 minutes. I do have some announcement, but before we do that, we talk about this. Any questions regarding ADP to ACCDB conversions? Anybody have any questions? Have you guys done any of these? Have you seen ADP files in the wild at all? George, have you had a chance to see these at all?
Okay, got my microphone isn't muted. I was
I can hear you.
Only one time, many years ago. It was I'm trying to remember the name of it. It was a nonprofit that ran a shelter for homeless people and provided a food kitchen and so on. And their program was written with an ADP. And
very nice.
As part of a volunteer project for nonprofits, I got to work on it for a few months. And that's the only time I ever saw one in the wild. And it was a case where you said before it had been in operation for years and years, and nobody knew how to work with ADPs anymore, and they couldn't afford a consultant to do the conversion. So they relied on volunteers to, stop by when they needed maintenance.
I see.
But that's the only time I ever saw one in the wild.
Oh, wow. But look, I've got some exciting news here. We're going to start next week with Access Beginners. So please help me promote that on LinkedIn, Twitter, and all your other social media channels. I'd like to be able to help these people who are trying to explore Access, trying to learn it better, right? What is Access? We're going to start out with next week. So I don't expect you guys to be in it. You're welcome to join, right? But I'll be talking about what is Access, Microsoft Access, what's a table, what's a record. God bless these people. They want to learn how to use a database. They have no idea, no clue where to start, right? So we're going to start with the Access Beginners group next week. I actually created a new group on LinkedIn. You're welcome to join there. And then tonight, I'm super excited about this. In a few minutes here, 40 minutes, we have our first AUG Italia session. Well, it'll be Italian. George Moore, how's your Italian?
Yes, not so good.
Not so good. Not so good, mamma mia. Yes. How about you, Linda? How's your Italian? Capiche or no capiche? So please join us
I
if
don't
you
speak
can.
Italian, but
No.
I just want to comment on something with SQL Server, with the queries and the views. In some cases, creating a temp table will make everything go a lot faster. Instead of having,
Yes.
the queries constantly regenerate, and you get much more control over the data.
There is something to be said. I actually blew out a blog post on creating temporary tables in Access. There is sometimes a need for that, right? Oh, thank you, George, for that link. It's in the comments there, George. Appreciate that. But yeah, there is sometimes a need to download, extract the results of a view into a temporary table in Access, then execute a routine on that, or bind it to a form, right? That is making that data editable, and then you can post it back to SQL Server with an update query. So stick around for a few more minutes. We're gonna do Access Italia. Even if you don't know Italian, I'd love you to be there. You can show some support for Alessandro, who is our chapter president.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, everybody. Unless there's more questions, any more questions, George? Did you have any
No,
questions?
so do you have a specific topic for your meeting for the inaugural of basics or beginners or?
Yes, and for beginners, we're gonna talk about what is Microsoft Access,
Okay.
what is a database, what's a table, what's a record, what's a query, what's a form. I mean, it's super basic. Somebody who comes into this from Excel and has no idea what a database is would love the presentation.
What might be a good idea in for a new user group, for the new Access group, is just take an Excel spreadsheet and bring it into Access, so you can show
That's
them.
going to be in November. We're gonna be doing that exercise in November.
Because that will clarify
What's
a
the
lot
difference
of,
between an Excel spreadsheet and a tables where multiple tables in Access?
well, that will show, in other words, because this way they can see the spreadsheet, which they may be more familiar with, and see what happens
Yes.
when it gets into Access.
Yeah, I mean, I might even do that next week. You'll see how far I can go. I'll be in Mexico next week working on my teeth. And so I'll be doing that live from the Merida, Mexico, which is part of the Yucatan.